Good evening. My name is Jennifer Tafe, and I am the director of the Museum of American Bird Art, or MABA, at Mass Audubon. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture. Tonight is the very first in our free fall online series, The Art of Birds. And with this series, we hope to broaden ideas about what bird art is and can be, and who's telling the bird stories and how. We have 6 exciting lectures in the series this fall, each featuring an accomplished scholar, creator, conservationist, or artist. And we hope you will join us for all of them by registering for free on our website at massaudubon.org/MABA, M-A-B-A. And I also want to encourage you, I think there may be some people in the audience today who might be new to our community. And I would encourage you to get to know MABA. Sign up for our e-news and learn more about our collection. We have about 3,000 objects in our collection, and many of those are available to view online. So I encourage you to explore. And also to learn about the new museum we are planning to build in Concord, Massachusetts at our beautiful Brewster's Woods Wildlife Sanctuary, where hopefully we can have lectures like this in person or in hybrid format in the future amongst our incredible art collection. And I hope you'll join us for our future lectures. I'd like to extend a special thanks to our IT staff and our marketing staff for making this series happen. And finally, we welcome and encourage your questions. So please enter those into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the close of the lecture. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Elizabeth Hargrave, and her talk entitled Wingspan, A Game Takes Flight. In this talk, Elizabeth will share the story of the creation of Wingspan, the board game that introduced millions of players to the beauty and diversity of bird life. Elizabeth is a board game designer known for creating nature-themed games that combine scientific accuracy with engaging gameplay. She gained international acclaim with her debut title, Wingspan, which won the prestigious Kennerspiel des Jahres, the Connoisseur's Game of the Year in 2019, and it has since sold over 2 million copies. The game's rare crossover appeal bridged the worlds of birding and board gaming, attracting new audiences to both worlds. Following Wingspan, Elizabeth designed several other games that explore different facets of the natural world, including Tussie Mussie, Mariposas, The Fox Experiment, Undergrove, and the forthcoming Sanibel, exploring themes ranging from the Victorian language of flowers to monarch butterfly migration, fox domestication, plant and fungus networks, and seashells. Before becoming a game designer, Elizabeth spent over 20 years working in health policy, focusing on programs for older adults and low-income individuals. Her background in policy and data analysis informs her thoughtful design process and her advocacy for greater representation of women and marginalized groups within the board game industry. She's also a founding member of the Tabletop Game Designers Association, helping to build a more connected and inclusive professional community for game creators. And of course, we at the Museum of American Bird Art are especially grateful to Elizabeth for the ways in which Wingspan has encouraged millions of new people to engage with the natural world, to care more about their environment, and to fall in love with birds. So we are so excited to have her with us tonight. So please welcome Elizabeth Hargrave.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I will go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to assume for most of this talk that the majority of people here have seen Wingspan before, but as a quick overview for someone who hasn't, just to give you a little bit more background. Wingspan is a card-driven board game where you've got your own little player mat that looks like a nature preserve, and you're playing these bird cards out onto the player mat. And as you're playing them out, they're making you better at the different activities that you need to do in the game, whether that's getting food for your birds or laying eggs or getting more bird cards. So by the end of the game, you've sort of built up this whole little ecosystem of birds. And Jennifer went over the high level overview of how well it has done. And I want to talk a little bit about how it happened and then some more about what happened after it came out. So how did I come to design Wingspan? I grew up playing a fair amount of games in my family, a lot of mainstream stuff that y'all probably also grew up with, a lot of Hearts and Rummy, and I loved Clue as a kid. And we also spent a lot of time outdoors. When I was an infant, we lived in Southern California. So my parents always talk about this trip that they took me camping in Joshua Tree as an infant, which in retrospect, now having friends who have infants seems crazy, but yay us. And then we moved to Southern Illinois, where we lived out in the woods and always had a bird feeder out on the deck. And then when I was in middle school, we moved to North Florida, which is not the Florida that most people imagine. It's a lot of beautiful live oak trees. There's a big prairie outside of Gainesville where I grew up, which has been restored with bison. There's lots of amazing water birds and alligators. Definitely a great place to explore the outdoors. Eventually I moved to DC around 2000. I met my now husband, Matt, who will play a little bit of a role in this story, but we continued to go exploring together, including stumbling upon the world of sort of modern board games for grown-ups. And in the course of one weekend, I played all three of these games, which many people, these have been their gateway into this hobby. And when I talk about sort of the modern hobby board game industry, I think of them as being games where you have interesting decisions to make on your turns. Your decisions matter. There can be some randomness in the game, but not so much that it doesn't really matter what you do. And it's not that you're like rolling dice and they're telling you what to do on your turn. And most of them have at least a little bit of a setting and a story to what's going on in the game, right? In Ticket to Ride, you're building train routes across the country. In Carcassonne, you're building castles or walled cities, really. So they're not completely abstract like Uno or Sorry, where there's no story at all. So after almost a decade of playing lots of these games, we started to ask, why are there no games about something we actually like, right? I talked about trains and castles, but there weren't a ton of these games that are about sort of nature themes. And so I started to think, like, what would that look like? And around that same time, Matt and I were starting to really be birders specifically, in addition to being generally outdoorsy people. We took a trip to Costa Rica that I sort of blame for this, because the birds there are so awesome. So these are all pictures I took on that trip. And Matt asked, what if there was specifically Race for the Galaxy, but with birds? This is a game we have been playing a lot. And it's a space theme. It's like space exploration, which does nothing for me. I appreciate that it's like an important theme to a lot of people, but not really for me. So out of that conversation, my brain just would not let it go. And I made what I now call my first fail faster prototype. I didn't really even know that term at the time, but it's an engineering term that's like, if you're going to make the first draft of something, just make something quick and dirty. Don't spend a lot of time on it, because whatever you do is going to change a lot, right? So I literally just like hand wrote all of my first bird cards and started playing two sides of a two-player game against myself and just sort of like, how would things move? How would this even work? For the next couple years or 3 years even, I was just iterating. So first, like I said, testing solo, roping in my friends and family. It took me a couple of years before I really got hooked in. There's a whole community of game designers here in the DC area. And there's a fantastic event up in Baltimore called Unpub, which is an unpublished games festival that happens every year. You can go for an entire weekend, almost 4 days now, and just play test games all weekend. Designers can get a table for a block of time, and just random people will come play their games for them, or other designers will stop by and play their games. It's incredibly productive, but it's also a great way to meet other designers, which I think is really important for a lot of us, to be able to kick ideas around at that level. So coming out of my very first Unpub in 2015, I met a bunch of people in the DC scene and started having sort of ongoing scheduled playtests with other designers once a week, which has made a huge difference to really push things forward. So by summer of 2016, I was finally feeling like I had a game that was pitchable to publishers. And I took it to the largest board game convention in North America, which is called Gen Con, which happens in Indianapolis every August. And this was my little sell sheet that I took to different publishers. I had emailed ahead and set up meetings, and met with, I think, 3 or 4 different publishers, and one of them was interested. So they did not sign the game right away, but gave me a bunch of feedback and told me to send them a game back. So by that Thanksgiving, Christmas time, I think I sent it at Thanksgiving. We had a contract at Christmas. And board game contracts usually work very similarly. If you are familiar at all with book contracts, you get a royalty for each game that sells. And the publisher is really responsible for making the physical object of the game. They're responsible for all the art and graphic design, the marketing, the manufacturing, which is great because that's all stuff that I have. Well, I'm interested in the art, but the rest of it I have no interest in doing. So from the point that I had a signed contract, I worked on it for another year with Jamie Stegmaier, who's the founder of Stonemaier Games, who signed the game, who is a game designer in his own right, a very good game designer. And it was like a masterclass in game design. And Wingspan changed a lot in that last year of development, which is not uncommon. A lot of games, after they get signed, the publisher will put a final layer of work into it that really takes it to the next level. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we changed in that last year. In my prototype that I pitched to Jamie, there was more in the game about building up a park. You had to invest in cards that were associated with the different habitats. You were doing like habitat restoration. You were starting up nesting programs to help your birds lay more eggs. But there were things that when I was playtesting, players kept saying that was not the interesting part of the game. It felt like just a chore that they had to do, but what they really wanted to focus on was the birds. So we came up with this player mat. Really, a bunch of it was Jamie's idea. I didn't realize I was allowed to add more components at the stage we were in, and this is a big one. But it really does streamline the like building up of your preserve. That the making your action stronger is just built into the process of adding birds to your park. They're one and the same, instead of having to take separate actions in the game to make that happen. And in addition, so in addition to the player mat, space is getting better and better as you build out your birds. Of course, the birds have powers on them themselves, which was not always true. Early on, only some of the birds in the deck had powers. And they were much more limited. Often they were just like, when you play the bird, do a thing, right? Like I think the herring gull used to go through the trash and get a card. The brown-headed cowbird has always had its power because I was fascinated by its nest parasitism, right? So the brown-headed cowbird in real life don't make their own nests. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And the power of the bird is that when another player takes the action to lay eggs, you get to lay another egg with your cowbird on another bird's nest. And so had to go through all the deck eventually, and I kept saying more cowbird, more cowbird, more powers on the birds until they all had them. I also pitched it to Stonemaier with 60 birds in the deck, and we grew it to 170 birds. The game Terraforming Mars had just come out, which had a huge deck and is really fun to explore, and we thought that would be great to do with the birds. It's a lot of work. Because there's a lot of data on each card, right? And I used eBird data mostly to sort of figure out the distribution of birds that I wanted, or that were sort of possibilities. I looked at what the most common birds were for different locations around the US to make sure that at least within North America, people would sort of see some birds in the deck that felt familiar to them, even if they weren't birders. But I also went fishing for rare birds and cool birds. I used Red List to find the endangered birds, which are ones that give you extra bonus cards in the game, and just, funky stuff. Beautiful birds definitely get a boost. Funny names get a boost. But each bird has a lot of data. Each card has a lot of data on it. And I definitely used the Audubon website and the Cornell website, as well as my own like physical field guides, to gather all of this information about all the different birds. I actually taught myself to do some web scraping with Octoparse to get some of the info off of these websites and just dump it in a spreadsheet to give me a little bit of a head start, because it's a lot of data collection, because I'm collecting on more birds than I actually ultimately use, so that I can get the right distribution of these things all in the deck, right? If you've noticed, the nest types are sort of evenly distributed, the habitats are evenly distributed in the deck. So you got to find the right number of birds to do that. It all goes into a giant spreadsheet, which has been publicized before. It is a little bit a thing of madness, but it's, as I said, it's a lot of information to keep track of. And then the other thing that I get out of keeping it all in a spreadsheet is that I have a program. There are several that will do this. I use Nandeck, that actually can translate. I like program it up to take information out of the spreadsheet and generate a whole deck of cards for me. So the habitat is in one column and the food is in another column, and it just like knows how to make the icons and where to put them. And that's an incredible time saver. I did not have that when I started, and I wish I had those hours of my life back. But then a lot of the work is just playtesting and playtesting and playtesting. This is a picture from the Board and Brew Game Cafe in College Park, Maryland, where I did a lot of the playtesting for the base game of Wingspan. A great crew of people with an organization called Break My Game. And if you look at the inside, like the bottom box, the outside edge of the bottom, all the playtesters' names are listed there, and we've done that in the expansions as well. So once my part of it was done, there were lots of other people who had to get involved. So there's a fantastic artist named Beth Sobel who does a lot of work in the board game world, who did the player mats, the card backs, but she didn't have time to do all the birds. So Stonemaier found two amazing artists to do all of the bird art. It was two people who did 170 illustrations over the course of several months. You can get prints of them on Natalia's website. I always like to point this out to people because it's just like, it's such a treat to see them in a larger format than the shrunk down version that's on the cards. And HarperCollins actually did a book of the birds in the base game, which again has larger versions of the art, which is really lovely. Here, they're both, Natalia and Anna are both from Colombia. So for their author picture for the book, they did some birds from Colombia. And Christine Santana did the graphic design for Wingspan. So it was really an all-women team except for Jamie on development, and except for some of the physical product design, which we'll talk about now, I believe. Yes. So, you know, there's a lot of other physical objects in the game, and someone has to make those. So it really is a huge team of people that go into making a board game. The guys who did the dice tower are in Ukraine, and there's this whole separate company that makes these molded inserts, which are now no longer plastic, but this was the original insert. Lots of work that went into it. And then all the files get sent off to China, and I have a little Mr. Rogers moment of some video from the manufacturing, not specifically of Wingspan, but. So once it makes it out of the manufacturing plant, it goes on a big boat. It can take 6 weeks to 3 months to get a game from China to the distribution point in St. Louis for North America. And, you know, that got much longer at some points in the last 5 or 6 years. But that is a big process in itself. So it takes a long time. It took almost a year from the point that I was penciled down on the game to the point that it was actually available for distribution, which ended up being 2019. So at the end of 2018, when it was clear that the games were on their way, Jamie started sort of sending out the first teasers that he had a new game coming out with Stonemaier Games, with these beautiful pictures on social media. And things started kind of lighting up even at this point, which was really interesting. And then, you know, he released it in January. I was internet free in Belize. I was on an Earthwatch trip tagging sharks and rays, which was sort of a long planned trip. And I hadn't known the exact release date. So, which is fine. I didn't need to be directly involved, but it sold out while I was out, and came back to sort of this whirlwind. By March, the editor of the science section of the New York Times is a Stonemaier fan. He's a board gamer, and so he was on the mailing list when Jamie was sending out apology letters that he hadn't printed enough Wingspan because it was so in demand. And so he sort of commissioned someone to write an article about me in the science section of the New York Times, because it's a science game, I guess. I'll take it. And then it turns out when people in the New York Times think your news, then other people think your news. So it sort of started to snowball the coverage that Wingspan was getting. It was definitely like getting out into birding circles at this point. So it was completely sold out. It was, as I said, it was going to be months before more copies came. People were selling copies on eBay for hundreds of dollars over list. It's a $60 game, hundreds of dollars over list price. And we were saying, no, it's not, you know, people were coming on the Facebook group going, why is this game so expensive? It's not. Just wait. We'll have more. By that May, Jennifer mentioned I was nominated for the Kennerspiel des Jahres, which is a prestigious German award, and that gets awarded in July. The German name is Flügelschlag, which amuses a lot of English speakers, which I think means wing flap. They didn't like the direct translation of wingspan. But a lot of other interesting things were happening. And, especially for a birding audience, people were starting to passively learn to identify birds just by playing Wingspan. And I started hearing about it on social media and stuff, that like, we saw this bird today and we knew exactly what it was. So that was kind of amazing to me. And people started tagging me because, thanks to Wingspan by Elizabeth Hargrave, we started bird watching, and now we're like going out on birding vacations. And some of these were solicited, like, have you started birding since we played Wingspan? But there are a lot of people. I still now get people coming up to me and saying, I started birding. This, I think, was my favorite when I did ask, like, who has this happened to? So this woman said, first I got Wingspan, and then I got some bird feeders, and I borrowed some binoculars and started using Merlin, got some more bird feeders, got a bird tattoo, got my own better binoculars, got some Wingspan expansions and more bird feeders and more Wingspan expansions. She was just all in, which I love. There have been wedding proposals using Wingspan. I put these 3 in a while ago, and I hear about more pretty regularly, which is super fun. Stonemeyer has made the template for their cards available online, so that probably helps quite a bit to make a good looking card. But one of the other things that I started noticing, and Jamie actually called this out first, he noticed, so he starts a Facebook group for each game that gets released by Stonemeyer, a separate Facebook group. And October of that first year, he noticed that the demographic makeup of the Wingspan Facebook group was significantly different from the ones for his other games. And his biggest one before Wingspan was called Scythe. And that Facebook group was only 9% women in October 2019. And the Wingspan group was already, after just 10 months of the game being out, it was 30% women, which I asked around at the time for a talk I was giving, and that was like the high end of Facebook groups related to board games, which, who knows, that's a weird self-selected group. But I just double checked last week, and Scythe is still hovering around 10% women. Wingspan is almost 50-50. And it's a huge Facebook group. If you do Facebook at all and you're not a member of the Facebook group, I highly recommend it. People are posting fun bird memes and interesting questions about, what could be the next powers that get added, or house rules, or, try this, all kinds of things. So it's a fun group. If you ever have a rules question, someone in that group will answer it within a minute or 2 of you posting it. It's kind of amazing. So I'm going to go on a little tangent about diversity in both board games and birding a little bit here. But the overwhelming majority of board game designers are white men. I meant to update this slide, but it has not changed a ton since this one was made. It's really lonely in the industry. There are actually quite a few women designers, but in terms of people who are getting like real recognition for their work, and just in the sea of many more male designers, there's not a lot of us by comparison, even though there are a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about that in relation to birding as well, because it really varies from community to community, I find, but across North America, at least, or I think these data are for the US, birding looks a lot like gaming, that it's a very white hobby. It's slightly skewed male, less skewed than gaming historically has been, but definitely skewed more male. as of 2016. And I think there are some barriers to entry that are worth thinking about for folks who are interested in changing the picture in both board games and in birding. Um, Within board games get expensive, and they're getting more expensive because of tariffs, right? And but there are a lot of good entry level games that are, you know, $20, which is cheaper than everyone going to the movies that's playing it, but still not nothing. But there are people working on ways to game for free, right? Local game stores have game nights where you can just come check things out. People hold meetups. A lot of public libraries have started getting into board games. Some game conventions offer scholarships to, especially to people from underrepresented groups. And you know, the biggest cost of entry to birding is really your binoculars at this point, because Merlin exists now. You don't even have to buy a field guide, really. And it drives me crazy when people come on the Facebook group for Wingspan and say, I want to get interested in, I want to get started birding. What should I get for binoculars? And people will recommend $2,000 binoculars to them. And I'm like, I birded for years with my trusty $85 pair of binoculars. I was fine. I got totally hooked. Eventually I upgraded. I still have not paid anywhere close to $2,000 for binoculars. But even $85 is a barrier to some people, right? There's a guy in my local community I remember seeing who just birds with a little monocular, which I think is like $30, right? Because that was the thing that was accessible to him. And I know there have been people in different communities thinking about, you know, how can we do scholarships for binoculars? How can we have loaner pairs available at bird walks that people run? You know, can we donate them to classrooms? Like, how do we get people started without having them bump up against this barrier? But also, like, we all need to be aware of like what we're like, not steering people towards the most intimidating end of the spectrum. And then, you know, I haven't talked to people as much about this in birding, but in gaming, you definitely hear from women who sort of get treated like a unicorn, or you know, like, oh, we're so excited you're here, like fawning over you because you're there, which can be uncomfortable. Or the opposite, thinking that you didn't even mean to show up in the space that you meant that you did mean to show up in, because it's so rare to see a woman there. You know, I think we just have to take people at face value. And if they show up to go birding, if they show up to play games, like, believe them that they want to be there and talk to them like another human being. It's a learnable skill, and we have to all sort of check our assumptions about who should be out there. And I think we are seeing a shift in both gaming and birding populations. Probably thanks to the pandemic in large part. A lot of people were seeking out new hobbies. And so we just all need to, I think, welcome everybody, but not like so welcoming that it's awkward. And I think this is the last piece I have on this, is just to like keep in mind the complexity of entry. I always, you know, a lot of people, Wingspan has been their first board game, and it's remarkable to me that's true, because their first, you know, modern complex hobby board game. It's a fairly complex game, and I get reminded of how complex it is when I've been to a couple of birding festivals and tried to teach it to people who really are starting from scratch, and who, you know, if you haven't played Wingspan by now, it's because you find it really hard. And I think that's legitimate for someone who hasn't played board games in 30 years, right? And the last one you played is Monopoly or Uno, or, you know, something where you don't really have to make decisions, and it blows people's minds that you have to make so many decisions in Wingspan, which to me is what makes a modern board game really fun and interesting, and scratches all the itches in my brain, but it can be a lot. And I think the same is true in birding, right? Like, if you don't know any birds, it is really overwhelming to show up and go birding with people who really know what they're doing and aren't explaining to you what they're seeing and how they know what it is. You can't just memorize them all right away. And I think we all need to take a step back and remember how, like, beginner's mind, like how hard it all was when we started. I'm in both gaming and birding. You know, some people do a really good job of running newcomer oriented events that I think can really capture people at that point of like they're curious but they don't know enough to like just dive in the deep end, and can you like give them an on-ramp that's a little gentler than just diving in with the experts. Oh, and some game design principles for birding, for attracting birders or gamers. Number one, nobody cares about what your goals are. They just want to have fun, right? Like the fact that you want them to bird is not like a reason for them to bird, or to play games. But people do like to experience delight. They like to feel smart. They like to take actions that matter. And those are all things that you can do in both birding and in gaming. And I think the most important thing, instead of just like expecting someone to meet you where you are, is like share your joy, and hopefully that joy will be infectious. All right, I will get to questions in a second, but one of the first questions that I often get asked is like, do I start more from the theme of a game and what it's about, or do I start more from the mechanic and like how the game works? And I honestly, I'm a little bit more on the theme and like what the game's about side, but really to start working on a game, I need both. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of the games that I've been doing since Wingspan, and talk a little bit about how those came together, just like one after the other quick. We can go back to them in questions if you guys have questions. But if you are not familiar with my lineup of games, this will tell you a little bit more about some of them. So I have a game, Tussie Mussy. It's about Victorian flower language, because that's cool that people used to make dictionaries of what it meant when you gave someone a certain flower. And it uses a mechanic, and this one came about for a game contest. So I had to just throw something together pretty fast. And I had recently heard a couple of other designers on podcasts say they thought it's a really underused mechanic to have people do what I call I split you choose. So you know, in Tussie Mussy, you're just splitting one card face up and one card face down, but you're giving it to other players and they're choosing, right? And so like I was like, oh, that would work really well with giving people flowers. And that was the origin story of Tussie Mussy. Mariposas, I wanted to do a game about monarch migration, the fact that monarchs go all the way from Mexico all the way up to Canada every summer. And there are 4 generations. So it's in the fall, right around this time of year, it's the great grandchildren of the butterflies that left that come back to Mexico, but somehow they know how to make the round trip, even though no one butterfly does that round trip. That's amazing. Obviously, it needs to be movement on a map. So that's mariposas. You're moving little butterflies around. The fox experiment is about a domestication experiment that started in Russia in the 1950s and is still going to get today, where they are selecting foxes purely based on their personality, but within like 10 generations, they started getting physical traits that we associate with domesticated dogs, like floppy ears and spots. And so I really got fascinated with the idea of like, how could you have multiple generations passing traits down in a game? And genetics to me also just like naturally called for dice and like some random mixing of things. So that's where the fox experiment came from. That one went through a lot of different iterations, but it was always generations and dice, just, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And then Undergrove is my last game that came out last year. And I really I'm a big mushroomer as well as a birder. We have a very active mushroom club here in the Washington, D.C. area. So I really wanted to do a game specifically about mycorrhizal networks, because there's trading involved, which just calls for a board game, right? So mushrooms and trees connect underground and are trading resources. So this game is all about that. And then I've been working on more Wingspan expansions. There's another one coming out in early 2026. I'm super excited for that. There's some new stuff in there. Wormspan and Finspan have come out in the last few years. Those are sort of spin-off standalone games from Wingspan. Wormspan's totally fantasy dragons. Finspan is another very realistic science-based game about the aquatic world. It's beautiful. They're both great. I was not hands-on designing them, but I did consult on both of them and sort of sign off on them, and I love them. Which is another question that I get asked all the time. They're great. I'm good friends with Connie Vogelman. She's also here in DC, so we play test together quite regularly. And then my next game that's coming out is called Sanibel, and it's going to be about collecting seashells on the beach. There's a board that is physically a beach, and you have a little person that you're walking down the beach picking up the seashells, and then they're tiles that you're arranging on a mat that's like your bag that you're putting them in. So I'm super excited about that one as well. That one hopefully will be here in January, or a little bit after. All right, and that's all I brought for you guys, and we can turn it over to questions. I do have a website if you want to get on my mailing list or anything like that. But I will stop sharing my screen and we can just hear from you guys.
Excellent. Elizabeth, thank you so much for that kind of, behind the scenes sneak peek on sort of how you got started. I mean, even just the birding interest and passion and, all this inspiration you had just growing up as, outdoors and spending more time outdoors. I love all those images of you and your family as a kid. It's so great. We have lots of questions, so I will just start at it here. Hopefully we can get through all of these, but we'll see. So our first question comes from Anne. She asks, I just want to say I loved the Roadrunner Easter egg with the Wing Song app. You might address this later, but what made you decide to make Wing Song? Were players asking for it?
So we did not make Wingsong. That was totally a fan created thing. I don't know how much they even coordinated with Stonemeyer to get permission to do it, or if they just like scanned in all their cards. So for those of you who do not know, if you play Wingspan, this is totally worth checking out. There's an app called Wingsong. And if you hover your phone over a Wingspan card when you play it, it will play the song of the bird using recordings from the Macaulay Library. So I don't know if we should say what the Easter egg is, but there is an obvious Easter egg for the Roadrunner card. It's really fun, but mostly it's truly recordings.
Yeah. We have another question from Jason. Hi, Elizabeth. My girlfriend and I are a bit late to the Wingspan party. We're really loving the game. In fact, we love it so much that often the game ends too quickly. Was a longer version, maybe twice as many seasons, ever discussed?
Not really. I feel like so the issue with a game like Wingspan is as you're building up and building up and building up, often, but the place I tried to end it is around the point where if someone gets ahead, they're going to stay ahead because they've built up all these abilities that they're like laying more eggs than everyone else or tucking more cards than everyone else. And if you play longer, it just gets worse and worse. So that is the reason that it ends kind of where it is. But you do see lots of people house ruling it. So in the Oceania expansion, I think it is one of the new end of round goals is to have no goal one of the rounds. So there are people who will take that and make that always the first goal so that you have that gives you a few more turns every year because you're not losing a cube on that round. Or a few more turns in the game. I have seen people like do crazy things where they put 2-player mats together and use like a whole extra set of cubes or something. I mean, yeah, be your own game designer, try it out. I don't care.
Yeah, go for it. Okay, let's see. Another question from Christina. Do you still use the same Excel Nandeck tools for your expansion designing, or have you developed new tools in the last few years?
I have switched more to Google Docs because I do more collaboration, which is easier in Google Docs than in Excel. I still do use Nandeck, and I always have in the back of my mind that I should like go explore some of the fancier things that require less hand coding of everything. But at this point, I have so many fancy Nandeck like codings written out for different things that I need to make that like I can just cut and paste from them. And so starting over in something else feels harder. Um, so yeah, I'm still like basic spreadsheet and Nandeck for almost everything.
Yeah, it
It
works.
works.
Um,
Free.
yeah. Let's see. We have another question. Christina asks, is there a game that inspired the broader tableau mechanic of Wingspan?
Yeah, like it was really Race for the Galaxy. We were playing that a lot at the time. Um, which is more pure cards than Wingspan ended up being. And definitely like different, it works differently, but there you will see some overlap. And one of the things that Race for the Galaxy does is that all the costs are just cards from your hand. So if you need to play a card that costs 3, you're discarding 3 cards. And I was really charmed that Finspan actually uses that. Finspan doesn't have specific food types like Wingspan does. You're just discarding other fish cards to for the cost of playing a card. It's a little throwback to Race for the Galaxy, kind of.
Um, Question from Anne. Can you talk a little bit more about women in gaming?
Mm.
I've been a gamer all my life and experienced all sorts of things, good and bad, when entering the room or entering the chat. Do you have thoughts on why Wingspan in particular is drawing in more women?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I really like there's part of me that doesn't want to be super essentialist about it, right? And be like, the pastel colors are really welcoming to women. But I think actually the pastel colors on the cover, like I think it's part of it. I think the fact that you're not beating other people up in the game probably helps. Even though there are plenty of women who like to play war games, right? Like on average, I think that helps. I think part of it might not be so much that it appeals to women as that it has a really broad appeal that like I think birds are just really universally appealing to people. Um and the art's gorgeous, like what's not to love, right? And so instead of these like edgy sci-fi or fantasy like dark things, like it's just universally appealing to people, which I can't take a ton of credit for. That's all the artists, but I think that's part of it. But I do think the mechanics, you're like you're building up your own little thing and no one else can really mess with it, and you can be satisfied by what you built by the end of the game, whether you won or not. I think that that does appeal to a certain play style that might skew more feminine, probably also skews towards people who are just like less competitive, less like deep into the board game hobby and like need to be proving their um amazing gaming brains, and it's just like satisfying.
Yeah, sounds like it's all of these things coming together, right?
Yeah.
And definitely agreed that birds certainly bring us all together and bring out, I think, the best in all of us. So, let's see. Here's a question from Elizabeth. What's your best score on Wingspan?
Several people have asked me this lately, right after I just said you can play Wingspan and not care about your score. I somewhere between like 105 and 115. I don't know. I haven't like I part of it is that mostly when I'm playing Wingspan, I'm playing new expansions that I'm playtesting. Like I don't just randomly break out Wingspan a lot because I'm playing it a lot for playtesting. So like I wouldn't count any scores from a playtest because things are not finalized and often are broken. And I don't super track my non-playtest scores either. I'd have to look. I've definitely like lost to competitive Wingspan players. I'm not like the most amazing Wingspan player.
Okay, let's see. So many questions. Okay. Um, okay, this is from Liberty. As a Mexican woman who is a naturalist, avid birder, and mushroomer, artist, and big board gamer, I've pretty much written an entire letter of responses of how much I relate to your story. But I'm going to stick to one question. How did you decide what mechanics to bring into Undergrove?
Oh yeah. I mean, the first big decision we had to make, and everything sort of flowed from this, was like who are you in the game? And really, is it like what how are we portraying this relationship? And so one option could have been that you were like a specific mushroom species seeking to partner with trees and trade with them. And I actually at one point had a prototype that kind of did that. Um, and then the flip side is that you could be a tree and then you could partner with lots of mushroom species. And that seemed inherently more fun for what I wanted to show people, which is the diversity of mushrooms. And that's like one fun thing to show people, right? So we ended up deciding that you're playing from the point of view of a tree. And then that gives you, okay, then what are the things that you want to do in the game? You're going to be photosynthesizing to get carbon. And that's going to be one of the major resources because that's what gets traded to the mushrooms. And then you're going to be trading with mushrooms and you're going to be partnering with mushrooms. And yeah. And so like, it all sort of built out from that initial decision. And then from there, it was a lot of iterating of like, okay, how are these things actually going to work on the table?
Excellent. I'm excited to play that game. We have so many questions. It's great. So it's wonderful. How often do you play Wingspan in your life? And do you use any of the expansions?
Um, Usually I am playing base Wingspan plus the next expansion that hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, and then
And
there
when
are
I am
questions
actively
about
working
what
on that, I am doing that at least once or twice a week.
there are questions about what the next expansion is.
Yeah, I'm not supposed to say, but you will know in a few months.
I figured. I figured.
There's only a few
Okay.
continents left.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. Would you ever make an expansion for Wingspan that allows players to sabotage each other by adding invasive species that eat birds or eggs?
Um, no, I think we have sort of decided one of the fundamental principles of Wingspan is that it is a very friendly game.
Great. Um, okay, so what doors are available for someone to enter the game design world with just a passion and ideas for board games, but little to no professional connections?
That is how almost everybody enters the board game industry. It is a like game design itself is a very hobby driven pursuit. Most people do it like I did as
Mm,
a side, just like hobby passion project on top of their day job. Very few of us are lucky enough to quit our jobs, which I did, and pursue game design full time. So my advice to people is number one, just play a lot of games so that you like start to develop and like think critically about them as you're playing them and like start to develop an understanding of what's happening mechanically in the games. And then just make something and it will suck. Your first draft will almost be guaranteed to suck, and it's fine. Everybody's first draft always sucks, but it gives you something to start with. And then it can be its own whole game, like how to make it better and better and better. And that iterative process is its own puzzle that I find really satisfying. Um, but you can't get to like the end point without starting with the really crappy, unsatisfying draft. And then the other piece of the puzzle is to figure out if there are game designers already in your community that you can hook up with, or are there people doing playtesting locally? If not, there's a lot that goes on online if you teach yourself how to use other, like there are tools that people have designed to be able to put your game up in like a sort of clunky online prototype version so that you can play test with other people remotely.
Excellent. Lindsay asks, what is your favorite bird from Wingspan? Which I think is interesting because is it
Yeah.
Wingspan, is your
So
favorite bird in Wingspan different from your favorite bird
I
birding?
have two questions. So because people ask me this all the time, I have decided that my favorite bird is the roseate spoonbill, which I love them. I'm from Florida, and so they remind me of home, and they're ridiculous, and I just love them. And one of my favorite bird cards in Wingspan though are the birds that move from row to row. And I love them partly because I love watching people understand how to use them, because it is not immediately obvious how strong they can be. And they're very situationally useful. But when you see it click for someone, like why you would want to play one of those birds, I love that there's a like I love that about board games, that you can like level up in your understanding of how things work and get better at them. And that's a very obvious little one in Wingspan.
Yeah. I've never seen a spoonbill, but I agree they're great and kind of silly. Um,
My mom just texted me the other day that they're back in Gainesville. They're
oh, great,
unreliable in Gainesville, but
great. Got to get down there. Um, so Kim asks, do you get royalties from downloads of digital versions of Wingspan?
yes.
Yes. And then he says, P.S., much like the tweet you shared of the person's Wingspan domino effect, Wingspan was the gateway to his career now at Mass Audubon. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
That's kind of amazing that it's only been what 6 years now. So
Oh,
yay.
we have we have a few other questions, but we are maybe I can ask one more question here. We have only a couple of minutes left. How about, do you anticipate adding a collaborative component to a future expansion?
Oh, like playing cooperatively. Um, there, I think it's the Oceania expansion actually has, as part of the Automa package. So there's a way to play Wingspan solo, right? And in that expansion, they also included a way to use that solo mode collaboratively. So I've been leaning on that as solving that problem for me, so I don't have to do it.
Well, I think we need to wrap up. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much for your incredible talk, exciting new expansion coming out, all these other important games that I think we're all interested now in running out and trying out. I hope that you'll come back and join us for another talk in the future on nature-based gaming.
Yeah.
Elizabeth's talk has been recorded and will be posted on our website, on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and also share it with friends and family. And we hope you'll join us again for our next lecture, which takes place on October 22nd and will feature Sam Zimmerman, an amazing Ojibwe artist who was the cover artist for Birding magazine in 2025. And he'll talk about the important bird relatives he paints in his work and his experiences with the natural landscape around Lake Superior. So I hope you will join us for those. Please go to our website to learn some more about MABA. And thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.